podium Lachlan McKenzie, Dairy Chairman of Federated Farmers, and we'll see if the farmers agree with the manufacturers and export.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mike Smith, your retiring Secretary General, for the opportunity of being here today. I believe I'm right in saying this is a first. I'm here today with David Broom from our Wellington office and with Simon. We're here to engage openly with you on a subject we are passionate about, our future. I'd also like to thank the Honourable David Cunliffe, Honourable Damien O'Connor, as well as members of your Rural Caucus for this opportunity. I'd also like to thank the Honourable Jim Anderton. A full version of this presentation will be available on our website next week, so I'll canter through the highlights of this so we can get into the talk and the interactive talking part of it. We believe in the future of our country and wish to be an active part of that future. Yet to go forward, we need to look back at the history a little bit. In 1988, the late David Longy said, "Farming is a sunset industry and manufacturing and tourism will take its place." In 1990, Harvard professor Michael Porter said, "New Zealand exports in a range of structurally unattractive and therefore low profit industries." In 2007, economist Brian Gaynor said, "New Zealand and Ireland have a great deal in common. They both have 4.2 million inhabitants, traditionally agricultural bases, and are small island countries with large dominant neighbours. These characteristics benefited New Zealand in the past, but are now perceived as economically disadvantages, whereas the Irish economy has been transformed into a Celtic tiger." The Guardian in February 2009, €7 billion injected into two of Ireland's major banks yesterday as part of a desperate plan not only to rescue the country's financial institutions, but also to save the Republic's entire economy. Perhaps Mark Twain could have commented, "The rumours of agricultural death have been greatly exaggerated." Let's look at the 1970s. We had and really have we fixed 6 main structural problems. In the 1970s, while there was a considerable external diversification, the domestic economy was still insulated and lacked the responsiveness that the external sector required. Today, the annual trade deficit for the year ending July was down to $2.5 billion. We are still living beyond our means. The terms of trades just announced 2 days ago, the worst quarter since 2008, and annualised the worst since 1951. So that's before I was even born. There is lack of exporters and too heavily biased towards the domestic economy, reiterating what we've already heard. In 1970, an increasingly sophisticated population, especially the well-travelled, rising urban middle class, were not always able to obtain consumer goods and services they desired. Today, there's no shortages of consumer goods and services, but have we gone overboard as a trade deficit and the debt statistics reveal? In the 1970s, New Zealand faced a complicated energy problem. While traditionally self-sufficient in electricity and coal, New Zealand had an imported transport fuel. In the late 60s, Maua gas field was found, and then the 4th biggest in the world by size, far outstripping the standard industry uses for gas in New Zealand. Adding to this, excess energy supply was a growing excess of hydropower in the South Island. Meanwhile, the world oil prices rose in the 70s and then fell again in the 80s. Today, New Zealand still faces an energy problem with a growing population. In the 1970s, New Zealand was in a strong inflationary mode compared with other OECD countries. Typically, the annual inflation rate exceeded 10%. Today, tradable inflation is under control by way of policy independently and better focused monetary policy, but non-tradable inflation acts as an economic millstone. The 1970s, there was severe fiscal deficit, which is the New Zealand government was spending much more than its reserves. The deficit was hidden by inflation because while the government debt grew in nominal terms, the value of that old debt was reduced in real terms. Today, New Zealand still has an issue with deficits, but the state has been joined by businesses and consumers, and collectively, this creates a demand for the Kiwi dollar as money is sucked into the economy. The system of government suffering from psoriasis in the 70s was increasingly hard to tackle anything but the most urgent problems. Its structure and processes has evolved to the point where there was little rationality in them, and yet they were unable to rationalise the major problems. Today, is MMP with a central tendency towards consensus to rein in government now repeating that same pattern? So let's look at agriculture. The past influences the present. The Treasury, the bastion of orthodoxy, went cold in agriculture in the 1970s, reflecting the seismic shift of British accession to the European Union. The UK, a country that once accounted for 68% of all New Zealand exports, shrank rapidly to around 6%. Think Big was attempted, a bit of crazy one, to diversify away from agriculture into energy and manufacturing. The Eastern Bloc economic planning courtesy of a national government. Some facts and figures about the economy's backbone. In 1990, exports from the entire agricultural sector, excluding fisheries, generated $13 billion in export revenue, 60% of all export dollars. Then we had all the intervening years. In 2008, exports from the entire agricultural sector, again excluding fisheries, generated $23.4 billion, a revenue of 61% of export. Our economic development is actually not a template. The biggest problem with economic development has been an obsession with trying to find template solutions. Commentators love to look at target economies, whether Ireland or Singapore, and apply that economic mix to New Zealand economy, just as Brian Kaino did with his bullish comment on Ireland. Thank God we did not emulate Ireland. Michael Porter's advice wasn't new either, but New Zealand could neither be the next Silicon or the Sweden or Switzerland of the South Pacific, because it's not part of our psyche. We don't have the institutional, intuitive grasp expected a new niche success. The inescapable lesson to draw is that successful economies don't copy, they leverage out of what makes them unique in the first place. We must truly unique, what makes us truly unique is agriculture. From Federated Farmers' perspective, a new take on Professor Porter. New Zealand's geopolitical position and export profile makes it attractive in a resource